I'd first like to begin by acknowledging the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation, traditional custodians of the land on which we virtually gather today. We acknowledge the strength of their continuing culture and offer our respects to Noongar elders past and present. When the international community agreed on 17 Sustainable Development Goals and a set of targets for improving lives while protecting natural resources by the year 2030, they included direct references to First Nations people, acknowledging that there can be no truly sustainable development without protecting the traditional knowledge and territories of First Nations communities. We have a lot to learn from our First Nations people about what it takes to maintain sustainable, resilient systems. And this knowledge, when combined with new information and innovation, could help accelerate the achievement of the SDGs. And that's precisely what today's SDG Business Forum is all about, how WA is accelerating innovation and the SDGs in the context of the state's post-COVID recovery. But before we dive into the session, I'll share some brief background on the UNAAWA and the SDG Business Forum. The West Australian division of the United Nations Association of Australia are dedicated to informing, inspiring and engaging the West Australian community and its leaders regarding the work, goals and values of the United Nations to create a safer, fairer and more sustainable world. The Sustainable Development Goals are the world's roadmap for achieving this. The SDG Business Forum is a series focused on raising awareness of the Sustainable Development Goals across both private and public sectors. It's been running for 2 years now and spanned a range of topics, speakers, sponsors and attendees. The events seek to elevate community awareness and understanding of topics relating to improving or achieving the SDGs. While the core theme of this SDG Business Forum is around accelerating innovation and the SDGs, we are fortunate to be joined by panellists who each represent different corners of WA's business community and therefore different parts of the 2030 agenda. We are honoured to be joined by local innovators and business leaders to weigh in on how we might build back better from this crisis. The speakers will each introduce themselves in a moment, but here's a bit of background first. Cettina is a senior leader across innovation and transformation with over 15 years experience across sectors and industries with roles spanning human resources, organisational development, business leadership, consulting, innovation and social impact. Cettina currently is the Innovation and Transformation Lead at the RACWA, a 115-year-old member-owned organisation that was founded in Western Australia. Cettina is currently on the advisory board and leadership team for the WA Innovation Hub, helping shape and drive innovation across the state in response to COVID-19. Elizabeth currently coordinates a multidisciplinary agricultural research program in Papua New Guinea on behalf of the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade and the Australian Centre for International Agricultural Research. Having lived in PNG and the WA wheat belt, Elizabeth has a unique insight into global food systems and extensive experience in produce marketing and agricultural development programs. She is a board director for the ASX-listed Wide Open Agriculture, among other board roles. Marcus is the founder, CEO and medical director of Healthengine, Australia's largest online consumer healthcare marketplace, helping millions of patients connect with thousands of healthcare providers nationally. A University of Western Australia medical graduate with an executive MBA from the Australian Graduate School of Management, Marcus is an experienced GP, healthcare executive and company director with over 20 years of clinical and commercial experience. His diverse career spans the health, technology, investment and philanthropic sectors. So we are ultra honoured that you could all join us as local innovators and business leaders to weigh in on how we might build back better from this crisis. And as COVID-19 sort of continues to wreak havoc both locally and abroad, Western Australia is in quite an enviable position with its sights set more so on recovery. And innovation certainly will play a critical role in communities emerging healthier, more resilient and sustainable. It's also central, I guess, broadly in advancing the Sustainable Development Goals. And to that end, I would love to introduce our UNAAWA President, Dr. Sandy Chong, who will be moderating the discussion and kicking off the Q&A session. So over to you, Sandy.
Thank you very much, Lily. Welcome, everyone. Greatly appreciate your time. As Lily mentioned before, our mandate is to really advocate and educate the WA community about what we're doing here in terms of promoting SDGs and how we can actually achieve that. And today, obviously, it's a real privilege to have all of you. And I'd like to start by asking a question from each of you. What is your passion? Give a bit of introduction about yourself and what does sustainability or the SDG mean to you? So maybe Elizabeth, you could start first.
Yeah, sure. Hello, everyone. My name's Liz, and I'm usually based in Wongan Hills. It's about 2 hours northeast of Perth. Our family farm on Balladong country and on Uward country. But today I find myself down on Whadjuk Noongar country. So for me, I'm involved in a whole range of different things across, I guess, the food and agriculture space. Our family, as I mentioned, farmed in the wheat belt, but part of my work is also based up in Papua New Guinea. So I manage a multidisciplinary agricultural research development project, or program rather, and have been doing that for the last 5 years or so. I used to live in Papua New Guinea for a couple of years, and that really gave me an insight into, I guess it challenged the way in which I thought that we could feed the world. And I've always, even from as a young girl, was quite interested in how it is that we're going to solve some of these wicked challenges around food insecurity and global hunger and whatnot. And I kind of thought the way that we farmed was the be all and end all, and it was actually living in Papua New Guinea that really challenged that for me. So in the last decade or so, I've taken on a number of leadership roles within the agricultural industry. The one that I'll probably reference most this evening is an ASX listed company that I've recently been appointed as a non-exec director on. It's called Wide Open Agriculture, and it's a regenerative, in fact, it's the first listed company worldwide that's in regenerative food and agriculture. Food systems and transforming food systems, what I'm really passionate about, which obviously aligns very closely with the SDGs.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Marcus, would you like to share with us your passion and your understanding for the SDG?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Sandy. Marcus Tan's my name. I'm a doctor by background. I've actually been involved quite a lot with health system reform on various levels, but particularly involved in groups like the Australian Medical Association and some of the sort of local state bodies for health policy setting and so on. I guess why I'm involved in this group is that over the last 10 years, I've actually built a digital health company, a company called Healthengine. I'm not a technologist, but someone who loves technology and its applications into particularly healthcare, obviously. I think the reason why I'm involved in a lot of this sort of stuff is that there's a recognition that healthcare and the costs associated with healthcare are ballooning to the point where it is unsustainable. It is actually going to kill several economies unless that gets under control. And the accessibility of healthcare is creating massive divide in societies. Certainly countries like the US, as an example, have huge healthcare systems, so much so that, in fact, we're talking about, sort of spends that are sort of, the fifth largest economy. If healthcare spend in the US, as an example, is a country, it'd be the fifth largest country in the world. And that's enormous. So if you kind of think about the spends that we're talking about, and the waste is also equally enormous. So we're talking about a third of healthcare spend is actually wasted in some way, shape or form in the US. And similarly, you'd see similar sort of waste in other countries as well. And I think that there's a huge disparity in terms of access to healthcare globally that needs to be fixed. And that's, part of the reason where I think technology and the proper use of data and the ability to measure stuff will actually help with that. And that's part of the reason why I'm involved.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. Indeed, I think good health and well-being could definitely use a bit of reform, particularly with technology. Cettina, would you like to share your perspective and also your passion for the SDGs?
Yeah, thank you. And thanks for having me. So by day, I work at RAC in Western Australia. And if you're a West Australian, we're a fairly iconic organisation, but have been around for 115 years. And when you think about things like social enterprises and purpose-driven organisations, we've been one of those for over a century. So amazing to be part of an organisation like that. I suppose my passion around the Sustainable Development Goals started long before I commenced at RAC, and really around health and education. So I'm really passionate about seeing people fulfill their potential, and for communities to be able to fulfill their potential. And at the root of that is really access to health and well-being and things that promote that, and also education. So a lot of my work history has really been centered around contributing to those industries.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Tina. And so just thought I ask everyone to think about some of these questions that's going to follow. What are the top 3 challenges you currently face or you have faced in putting innovative ideas into practice? Doesn't have to be innovation or technology, but just innovative ideas into practice. And in other words, where are the pressure points? And can you give us an example of 2 of such challenges? Anyone? Elizabeth.
Sure, I think it's good to be directed, so thank you for that in terms of the order. So one thing I kind of touched on in the introduction is about how we've always done things, and the ag industry is pretty well regarded into doing things intergenerationally. How Dad did it, how Mum did it, and I think the way that we've always done things is fine, but I think with the challenges that we're now facing, as I mentioned, around global food insecurity, climate change, and many of the other wicked problems that we face as a global community, we need to actually reconsider how it is that we do things. So yeah, that's the first challenge. The second challenge is bringing people along. We are a conventional farming family that went and did something quite differently because we saw the effects of climate change many, many years ago, decades ago in fact, and we diversified into pigs, which is quite unusual for our area. And then about 20 years ago, we diversified into citrus, and we're now the largest or second largest citrus producer in Western Australia. And that was a very intentional strategic decision. So I use that example to say that we brought people within the citrus industry, for example, along with us. And, we can't, if we're going to solve these issues around providing enough food, for example, we need to work together. Similarly with different types of farmers, conventional versus organic, we can't be us versus them, we've actually got to work together. The third thing, the biggest challenge and I feel like a broken record every opportunity I get, I'm here because the satellite crashed at home. Well, not literally crashed, but we have no internet at home. So access to basic service provision, Internet One for doing business. Marcus mentioned having wonderful technology, transforming the way the health industry is with technology. But for a lot of people in regional communities in Australia, it is a data desert. Like, we cannot do business. And then if we're thinking about, we have wonderful, for example, telehealth services and whatnot, but they are few and far between. So access to service, internet, for example, is a really critical challenge.
Mm. And you, Marcus?
Yeah, look, I think, sort of Elizabeth's kind of pointed to it, but, healthcare is actually a very, very, very difficult sector to try and change and innovate in, largely because it's, the players in it are very conservative, lives are on the line. It's very hard to sort of convince people to move outside of things or take chances because of the potential repercussions to people's healthcare. And so, so that's actually very, very difficult. So finding early adopters to do the innovation or to accept a certain idea isn't the easiest thing in the world. It's also clearly a very highly regulated sector. And so, and again, it's because it's there to try and protect people. And I think that's completely understandable. But the problem with that obviously is that when you have too many regulations, is that now it's very easy to fall foul of them, even though you don't intend to. And, we've directly had our own issues with that. And I think that's really quite difficult. And of course, sometimes laws and regulations themselves don't necessarily keep up with the technological advances and some of those things. So there are a whole bunch of ethical and, other issues that will come up out of technology that haven't ever been contemplated by law. And so everybody's playing catch up. So that's actually really very difficult. And of course, the last thing is that innovation is actually, great, but often we're working off of experiments and sort of trials and things that are what we call MVP, which is minimum viable product, which is basically this sort of hacked up thing that will hopefully solve something for somebody. But actually, if you want to scale some of that, you want to grow it to a point where it's either commercially sustainable or it's, something that can be scaled out to a lot of people, you can actually end up, having to create a whole bunch of problems in terms of getting mass adoption, because you don't have the systems in place, or you don't have, you've built up so much debt in hacking stuff together that it actually isn't fit for purpose anymore in terms of, rolling it out at scale. So, these are clearly challenges that, if you want to reach a lot of people, you have to think about.
And Cettina, so as you can, as Marcus mentioned before, so scalability sometimes an issue, and then skirting or not, basically trying to manage expectations and also trying to manage all these regulations is tough. What about RAC, the industry that you're operating in? What sort of challenges do you face when you try to implement an innovative solution?
Yeah, so I'll take being an innovator in an organisation that's been around for over 100 years, a bit different to the other two speakers on the line, but very similar types of issues. So one is definitely a challenge is having that leadership and the buy-in around, do we want to do things differently? What does that look like? What are we willing to do? And how much can we invest? So from an organisational point of view, when we're looking at new opportunities, we're always thinking about, well, what does this mean for our member base? How is this really serving them? And how is it creating additional value for their lives, and making sure that we meet them there? So I suppose from an organisational point of view, that leadership, that personal leadership is really important. And even if you're in a startup or a smaller business, I think it does take that tenacity and grit to do something different that maybe people in your industry misunderstand as well. In the first instance, so they're like, why would you do that? And I think there's an element of bravery and courageousness that's required when you're looking at trying to do things differently, shake things up, and actually build innovative ideas. Similar to what Marcus also said, we really look at innovation as a discipline for an organisation. So it's something that, yes, you want to build experiment, and you want to build smaller pilots, but you don't want to do that forever. And I think that's understanding when you scale and how you scale is really important. And for us, we're still learning that, and we'll continue to learn that in different ways. But if you think about insurance, it's been around for a long time, it's highly regulated as well. And there's a lot of regulatory reform that's happening in that industry. And in the automotive industry, there's a lot of technological change that's occurring that's really impacting the way people get around, how vehicles are manufactured, and also the future of personal vehicles and what that looks like, including autonomous vehicles. So from an innovation point of view, and I said that the challenges would definitely be, having that leadership, personal leadership, the structures and the systems or processes in place to actually support innovation as a discipline, as something that you do often. And the last one will be funding. And we all talk about funding, but actually funding new concepts in their early stages where they don't have a natural owner in an organisation can be really challenging. So they're the three things that we kind of tackle on a day-to-day basis.
So we'll talk about the funding later on, but I think more interestingly enough, we're all now talking about the next norm or the new norm, building back from a better norm, and of course from this whole entire crisis, a lot of companies are basically disrupting themselves or being disrupted tremendously, and therefore they're trying new things, they're experimenting new things. So what kind of innovative solution have you seen or put in practice in your organization in order to overcome these challenges that were presented by the COVID crisis? Cettina, would you like to share some of that first? Yeah.
Sure, happy to share. From a large organisation point of view, obviously, when we went into that crisis mode, we have a crisis management team that kind of supports what we call the operational areas. So to ensure that we can continue delivering essential services to our members, and ensuring that we can continue to service people that are connected with us and our suppliers and partners. So we worked really closely with them to ensure that there was little to minimum disruption. And we work with a lot of local businesses as well. So, and as you know, lots of local businesses were going through a difficult time. So keeping them propped up, keeping them supported was really important part of doing that. One of the other, I suppose, a little bit out there, which is not just your standard kind of crisis management type stuff, is that we set up a collab space. So this was where people from our within our organisation could come together to actually try and solve some of these things that we were seeing in a different way, and to include our members as part of that process. So we ran a series of kind of design processes to kind of uncover, well, what can we do that's different? How do we look at things differently? How can we change through this and adapt? And one of the things that came out of that, which was launched recently, was a program called Reconnect WA, which RAC basically has $1 million worth of funding that they're basically providing to local governments to apply for, to look at how they can reimagine and redesign their communities to support them through this process. So how do we still create those vibrant and thriving communities, even though it comes with a whole lot of constraints and restrictions as we start to kind of work through the pandemic.
Brilliant.
So yeah, lots of different things.
Yeah, seems to be quite challenging, but it's good that you guys seem to have a system in place to deal with these challenges. Marcus,
Yes.
what about you? What kind of examples can you share? What sort of innovative solution have you actually come up with during this COVID crisis?
Yeah, so I think we've referenced this slightly before when Elizabeth started talking a little bit about telehealth. I mean, clearly, when the COVID crisis sort of hit its peak and everybody was sort of needing to self-isolate and so on, there was a concern by both patients and also clinicians on the ground about, getting infected and so on. And so a lot of our customers who are basically GPs and, in the small, medium enterprise sort of space, they were very keen to ensure that they were protecting their staff and other patients from, getting infections. But that meant that a lot of people couldn't attend the practice. So, we needed to very, very quickly create access, but not in a face-to-face environment or a physical environment. So that's where we pivoted to telehealth. Telehealth has been around for the longest of times, but, what do they say? Necessity is the mother of invention. So at some point, people who didn't really want to use it, which a lot of the clinicians didn't really want to use because they felt it was suboptimal in some way, shape or form, were requiring to use it because they didn't have a choice. And that, in conjunction with Medicare rebates for general practices being able to use telehealth, has really transformed the telehealth industry. And I guess in some ways, because the fact that we're using Zoom and these other sorts of remote working tools, that's been translated into our organisation as well. Obviously, during that period, we were able to move lock, stock and barrel out of the office into working from home, and that's obviously WA is in a much better spot now, so we've been able to come back into the office, but we've actually now adapted somewhat to working remotely, and actually people are liking it. So, we've been doing a lot more of that. A big part of the challenge, I guess, during the COVID crisis for the organization was that the visibility of leadership started to become very difficult when you're on Zoom. You're in separate places. It's very hard to have town hall meetings, hard to make sure that people are looked after. And part of one of the initiatives, it's a micro initiative within our business that I've really, really enjoyed. I like sharing with people, is that we use Slack, which is this kind of communications tool that some of you will be aware of, as a sort of communications channel within our business. And I actually created a whole new Slack channel that was called The Daily Doctor, which is kind of like the newsletter that was a tiny blog, a snippet of my day, things that I was worried about, things that, that I was happy to share and to promote, and then snippets of trivia and, questions to engage, basically just to get conversation going about all sorts of topics. And that really created the visibility of leadership that I think a lot of the team really appreciated during a period where basically we couldn't we couldn't socialize with each other and couldn't have the water cooler talk and some of the things that most people would have expected if they were in the office. And I'm still doing it even though we're back in the office. So it's something that we continued.
Right. Elizabeth, would you like to share your thoughts on this question? Go ahead.
Yeah, great. And I was going to reflect on a couple of things that Marcus said, but I think just to your point about the humanity, I think that has been the most heartening thing for me through this whole COVID scenario. I come from a small country town, so we're very well connected, but I think and everyone's worried about what everyone else is doing all of the time, but coronavirus, I think, is really sort of enhanced that at a global scale, something that's wonderful. In an agricultural sense, I'll give kind of two examples, a bit of a micro example and then a macro example about what I see is possible. In the micro example, so in Wide Open Agriculture, our food brand Dirty Clean Food, which connects regenerative farmers with conscious consumers and ultimately ethical investors, if they're a shareholder. we had to be really agile. It was, we went from, you know, we had great customers. We had 50 restaurants that we were working with, and pretty much overnight they were shut down. Some did pivot to be able to offer home delivery services and whatnot. But for us as a business, it was all hands on deck, and, you know, CEO, everyone was right down to the minutiae. So in terms of a leadership pivot, it was really about, you know, getting across, everyone hands in the mud, getting dirty, to get, you know, to ensure that people still got food. So there's that example, but at a macro level, I think what's important, so in that particular example, a bit to Marcus's point, but the hard reset. Okay, so what's not been working in our food system, for example, and often there is a complaint in a supply chain that the middleman takes the hugest cut of a particular product, whether it's a litre of milk or whatnot. And so I think, I'd like to think that coronavirus is going to be the catalyst that we've been waiting for about reassessing how we do things. And I think at a macro level, just because our farm grows wheat doesn't mean that we should. Yes, it's what my great-grandmother did, but if we're actually thinking more holistically about how it is that we're going to solve climate change and water resource use, you know, and being really mindful of how we do things, it actually might be, I mean, I don't have an answer, I guess, is the question that I'm putting up. It's prompting these kinds of questions about how is it that we best use our natural resources, which are so finite. We've not been using them well, which is why we've gotten to many of the challenges we've got. So how can we use this scenario, or use this situation to reimagine what, for example, a food system could look like? And it's not just about genetically modifying, it's about systematically modifying, so that we are actually taking into consideration not just the economic metrics, but the environmental, the social, you know, all of the metrics. So, yeah.
Absolutely. I think those are some really good points. And just thought I ask, it's not always easy to scale out innovation. So we're talking about that funding issue now. So, and to ensure that everyone benefit from them, you know, it's important that you get the right funding. It's important you get the right support, and more importantly, overcome these inertia and gain support from the top. So it's probably easier because, Marcus, you're the leader of the organization and you're leading it. So people could see that vision and you can lead people through that. So what kind of support do you think people need in order to be innovative, in order to be encouraged to think more for the, you know, the environment, the social, the community aspect? What do you think are the things that people need, so that, you know, it's up in their psyche when they come up with a solution, or when they're brainstorming about challenges, they are aware, not just, you know, they're not just aware of the environment as in the business environment, but also the whole entire ecosystem that surrounds it. Cettina, would you like to share some of your thoughts on that?
Yeah, sure. I mean, in an organization, that's an interesting one, because often, you know, we have lots of different people in the organization all focused on achieving a different outcome, you know, from our frontline service people to our accountants to legal to innovators. And I think the key thing for me is a couple of things. One is we always talk about rallying people around a common goal and purpose and how important that is. And I think for us at RAC, it extends beyond a shareholder. So we don't have shareholders, we're member owned. And so our purpose is driven to do better things for the WA community. And usually around like the safe, sustainable and connected communities, specifically around mobility. So I think connecting people with that sense of meaning and purpose is part of driving a broader thinking around how do we innovate and why is it important. In a more practical sense, I think in the environment that you create for people, so whether you are a lone innovator and you're starting your own startup, or if you're in an organization, you need a support network, whatever that looks like, right? And you need people that can help you take something that seems an obscure idea into the next stage. And so that's where the process and system and the discipline comes in. And you see that in the Perth ecosystem around you know, accelerators, or, you know, different types of training and coaching that people can access if out there, and including funding. But internally at RAC, we have those support structures to help people build new ideas and new thinking. And funding, obviously, being one of those. So how do you fund early stage ideas. And in organizations, again, that's different. I mean, we have Better Labs, which is the $23 million kind of venture fund, which looks at funding, you know, organizations external to, or ideas external to RAC, so outside of the organization. But we also have prototype funds and things like that internally to help employees build ideas and improvements. So I think the purpose that connects you to the meaning of why you're doing things, the drive and the systems and structures to kind of support that. And again, I suppose you need that inspiration, and that needs to come from somewhere. So yeah, how do you bring that outside perspective in to get people a little bit amped up about what's possible?
Yeah, brilliant. That's such a good point. And Marcus, for you, how do you actually communicate? How do you actually bring visibility to a business like yours so that people can really rally behind your idea, rally behind your innovation or your innovative solutions, and also help you with attracting funding to grow your organization or to grow your business to a scalable size?
Yeah, look, I mean, it's not easy. I think that as a startup, it's very hard to get this sort of attention that will actually, you know, attract funding. It really helps if you've got a big mission, though. So I think, you know, to Chet's point, I think having an inspiring sort of vision that you want to create, sort of the sort of impact that you want to create in the world really, really helps. I think the part of the problem is that it's got to be believable that you can actually make a difference there. So, you know, you have to build a certain amount of credibility. You need to have some sort of domain expertise potentially, or have a team that has that domain expertise to be able to, you know, to have people back you. We've actually been very fortunate to have attracted a lot of funding, you know, around some of the grand ideas. There are so many problems in healthcare. So I think people, you know, it resonates with everybody because they felt it themselves or had family members experience it. So I think, you know, fixing healthcare is a noble enough goal. We talk about having the mission to Mars, you know, being you know, our sort of internal sort of analogy to what we're trying to create here is that, you know, we don't know how to get there necessarily, but we're going to try and we're going to back each other to get there. I think part of the difficulty in a lot of large organizations, and we're lucky to be a smaller organization, albeit, you know, we're growing quickly, I think is that you've got to reduce the politics of, look, you know, somebody's idea, right? Like, I think that there's a case for having full alignment around taking bets together and making sure that we fail and succeed together, but we're doing it together. Otherwise, you end up creating this environment where people are very scared and conservative when it comes to making change, is because they're worried that the failure will somehow tarnish their reputations or tarnish their ability to grow in that organization. And I think that's you know, certainly going to be you know, something that will make it harder in certain larger organizations or government organizations and so on to do. But sort of, we sometimes talk about having incubators or startups where, you know, if you want to sort of sometimes hive off, and I think RAC has done a fantastic job with this sort of stuff, where hiving off some of the innovation so that you get away from the bureaucracy of the larger organization probably helps. And we're getting to the point now where, you know, even talking about core business versus some sort of Horizon 2 or Horizon 3 type of innovation is even hard, even within our business, which is, I still think of as a startup. So I think having the will to actually do it and willing to take chances together is actually the big part of it.
Thank you, Marcus. And what about you, Elizabeth? You know, people are saying that because of this whole entire crisis, other than health, like what Marcus was saying, obviously jobs and particularly food supplies, education, all sorts of issues are starting to surface. And for someone like you who's operating in a very tight-knitted community, how do you get people to stand behind the innovative ideas so that no one in your community get left behind?
I think it's already been touched on in terms of ensuring that there is a vision about what it is that you're trying to create. I think that's really important, and understanding, I think it's, especially when people, and I've seen this time and time again in regional communities, we have an outside expert come in and tell us how we can do a thing. And we've actually really we know what works. We just don't have, there's something missing that's not enabling us to actually solve X. So I think understanding your target audience, it's a bit of that asset-based community development, ABCD, understanding, you know, looking for those strengths within a community or within a business, or, you know, the environment that you're working within. So I think, yeah, leadership, vision, understanding your target audience, working with your strengths, and, you know, capitalising on those, and seeing change as an opportunity, not just a threat. But in terms of scale, one thing, and this is kind of a bit of a random example, but it's one thing that's worked really well in Papua New Guinea, and it kind of actually applies here in Australia as well, with how farmers relate to each other. Humans learn from humans, and we learn best from like-minded people. And we've had this really successful research project in PNG, which is working with smallholder cocoa producers. And we're enabling them to become cocoa model farmer trainers. So it's kind of having them being the teachers. And the scale has actually gone exponential. And that is because each of the cocoa model farmers has been given the permission to do things like solve X, but do things that's context specific. So which speaks again to my point around regional communities, but also that farmers learn best from other farmers as well. And I'm sure the same could be said across multiple industries.
So providing that context, either contextualizing or localizing that initiative, so that everyone feel like they somehow have some sort of ownership and they are empowered to come up with the solution rather than imposing these solutions on them. So that's quite an interesting insight. So if you were to name one of these positive outcomes that came out from the past few months, what would it be for you, particularly in the work that you do, particularly in promoting innovation or innovative thinking in your industry, Elizabeth?
So I have already mentioned it, but compassion has been the thing for me. So just people, you know, I saw it in the first few days of lockdown. When I lived in Papua New Guinea, it is the height of rudeness not to say hello to someone on a day-to-day basis. And I felt like the whole of Perth, I had a couple of weeks in Perth at lockdown initially. And it was like this great permission to say hello to people. And it's like, why are we not doing that anyway? That's a trait that I inherited after living in PNG. So compassion was certainly there for me. And then perhaps unsurprisingly, I bang on at every opportunity that I get to talk about food. Food is a connector into the agricultural industry, and I'm really excited that people are taking more of an interest because of the supply chain breakdowns, because we had toilet paper run-ons, because of not that toilet paper's food, but, you know, like because of those supply issues. That's really, for me, it has been a positive outcome, albeit a bit of a trying time. But I think, again, using this particular, and we're not through it yet, but using this situation as a catalyst to find the silver lining of how we solve the big picture problems.
Yeah, brilliant. What about you, Marcus? What's the one positive outcome that comes up from this whole entire crisis? And how did you actually restore this morale or this confidence and interest? I think it's probably easier in your sector because, you know, health is a big issue now. Everyone is always thinking about health. But yeah, any sort of positive outcomes you can share from this journey of trying to be innovative?
Yeah, absolutely. So for us, as we sort of talked about, telehealth has, the agenda for telehealth was set for a 10-year adoption, right? And we've gotten in 10 years in 10 days what was predicted to happen in 10 years. So in that sense, it's really shrunk the adoption curve, which is amazing. I think for us as a team, like the ability to actually pivot and adapt to what hit us, we had 60% of our customers close overnight in certain cases. And so at some point being able to pivot and help them get back online and, you know, being able to see customers in a 2-week sprint, which is basically what we did, like, it was amazing. And the belief that it, you know, created in the team that they could actually, you know, I mean, sure, they worked really, really long hours and you know, we burnt the midnight oil, but that belief was just amazing. I think on a personal note though, I think not having to travel nearly as much, you know, and spending more time with family, I've become amazing at table tennis. So that's certainly a positive outcome.
Brilliant. What about you, Cettina? Any positive outcome you can share over the last few months in the work that you're doing to promote innovation?
Yeah, I think similar to what's been said already, in Western Australia, this amazing sense of compassion and energy and I suppose willingness and openness to actually try and do something. And I think a lot of people wanted to contribute in some way in terms of making their communities better or solving things. And we absolutely saw that internally at RAC. So the power of people. And the beauty about everyone just saying, like, how can we help? What can we do? You know, even if it's not my day-to-day role, how can I chip in and you know, make sure that you know, everyone gets the opportunity to either work from home or keep safe. You know, how can we ensure that, you know, we're keeping up with the demand around essential services and supporting our members and healthcare workers and things like that. So again, similar to what Marcus was saying there around the power of people and the power of community is pretty amazing at this time. And we're very fortunate to kind of see the value of that as we head into whatever the next phase looks like, whatever the new normal, next normal, kind of normal looks like. And I think outside of RAC, you see that in different areas as well. And so it's not just from my organisation. You know, I'm part of a global kind of think tank around COVID-19, and you hear stories around what's happening in places like Brazil and Colombia, and it's very different to our lived experience here in Western Australia, and yet you hear the same things. You know, people want to help, they want to be proactive, governments want to step in and do things to try and support their communities. So I think that's been an amazing thing to see.
And so, you know, the next question I would like to ask all of you is that if you can give one piece of really good advice to someone as an individual or as a business or even a government sector, I mean, who wants to really harness innovation to overcome some of the challenges that we talked about, what would it be? What would be your advice, and how can we all come out stronger? So, Marcus, you want to go first?
Yeah, sure. Look, I think the message that I want to give is that, you know, innovating is hard, right? Like, you know, you need an equal amount of conviction. I mean, we talked about grit, like, you know, and you need to mix that with patience and flexibility, right? If you want to succeed, but it takes longer than you think. It's going to cost more. It's more painful than you can possibly expect. And I'm not trying to dissuade anyone, but it's you know, you need to back yourself and be able to, like, you know, have a team that has enough belief to be able to get through the many challenges that will face you. But I think the message has to be that there's no such thing as failure, because the failure, you know, it's all about learning, right? In certainly innovation, it's all about learning, and the only failure is actually failing to learn. And I think that's you know, that hopefully doesn't dissuade people, but it's you know, you do need to be patient.
And Elizabeth?
So mine is a little bit different because I'm all about, you know, solving world hunger. So,
Absolutely fine.
Yeah. So for me, it's actually I work across a number of different fields and often get a little bit disheartened, like, oh my gosh, how are we going to do this thing? Like, this is a big, wicked problem. And so for me, kind of my sanity check is defining what it is that you're seeking to, or define and consider what it is that you're seeking to transform, and then break it down into smaller parts and prioritize ruthlessly. So it's kind of like the same way you eat an elephant, you know, in small chunks is how we're going to solve, you know, as I said, the big, wicked issues facing us today. And I think, you know, one thing certainly, and Chet mentioned it before, around having a support network, a team of people that can pick you up, scrape you off the pavement when you're having a rough day, but also equally be your accountability partner, because, you know, we want to lift each other. We are all going to need to aspire to loftier goals to be able to solve these, you know, issues like climate change and whatnot. And Marcus, I feel like I'm stealing everyone's words now, but for me, what I learned a number of years ago is that you don't have to have all the answers. And I guess the key part is asking, you know, recognizing that you're not, you know, a genius and not anyone has all the answers, but asking really good questions is almost more important. And finding people smarter than you to work with, because you learn, and it's a big learning curve. So yeah, that was like a piece of advice. Sorry about that.
No, that absolutely, really, really good wisdom there. And Cettina, what about you?
Oh, I think they stole all the important ones. No, look, I always say big ambitions, small experiments. You know, it's okay to be really ambitious and want to do amazing things and have an impact. But sometimes if you think about it at that scale, it can be overwhelming. So we always say small experiments to get you started and to start somewhere. Because I think, as we've talked about as a group, you know, the fear of failure, the fear of trying something new and different can be quite daunting, because it's actually putting you in a headspace and almost a feeling of nervousness, which can be exciting for some people, maybe like people that are on this interview. That sense of nervousness and not knowing and the ambiguity, like, oh, I don't know, but this is exciting. Whereas for others, it's completely the other way around. It's really overwhelming. Yeah. I think if you're a government officer and you start to think about, I'm trying to change a system and it's so hard and it's so big and I'm only a little cog in this giant machine. Well, actually, what is it that you can do that is maybe even incremental that makes tomorrow better? And so you can have small things that you can do, have that mindset to it, or you can go, I actually want to get on the moon, or Mars. But to get there, I need to take really small experiments, and I need to break it up in a way that, you know, I can also bring other people along that are smarter than me, or that can help me to get there. So yeah, big ambitions, small experiments.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, you know, Perth being really isolated from the rest of the world, a lot of times we are very dependent on ourselves. We have to be very self-reliant. And because of that, a lot of very innovative ideas or innovative people, or very creative people come out of this sense of isolation. And I think just to sum it up, you know, with everything that's been shared today, I think it's important to understand that we're in really unprecedented times. If you're an innovator, if you're an entrepreneur, if you're head of an organization that's leading innovation, I think the key thing is to experiment stuff, be willing to fail, have a reality check, and like what Marcus was saying, you know, have the big picture thing, but always, you know, always asking yourself, always challenging yourself, you know, can you do things better? Who should we engage with to get a more realistic approach to breaking down these innovative process, or this whole entire process, into sizable pieces. And like what Elizabeth and Cettina have added, leadership is important, but I think more importantly, don't beat yourself up. You're not going to know everything. You just got to try. And I think this is so essential as Western Australians, because, you know, we do need innovation to get us out of this. And I think, fortunately, compared to other states, we're doing much better. But having said that, the times ahead is going to be quite tough. So if anything, we need innovation to get us out of this. And if we want to recover more effectively, I mean, a lot of people tend to think WA must be associated with mining, must be associated with resource sector, but we also have a lot of innovation that can come out from, say, for example, even health, transportation, and insurance, as well as food. And so I think people need to keep reminding ourselves that we can do it. We just need to, you know, set up that whole ecosystem, or even like what Elizabeth was saying, have a network of people around you that could resonate with you, that could actually challenge you, but I think more importantly, be really constructive if you want to move ahead and want to be a stronger community, and even building a stronger economy for our state. And so the final question I have for all of you is that is on a personal level, are there any of the SDGs that particularly resonate more with you than others, and which one of them you love most, and why? So Elizabeth?
I feel like it's obvious. Number 2, zero hunger.
Well, sometimes it's not that obvious, because sometimes we ask these speakers and they say, oh, it's like trying to choose between your kids, you know, they're all good and they're all important. So, okay, sure, food security is definitely important to you. Anything else? Any other SDG?
Well, it's actually closely, I'm a country girl. I love being, you know, home on the farm, connecting to country, and also working with natural resources in a really sustainable way. So the other SDGs around responsible consumption and production.
Yes.
Well, and number 14, life on the land. You can't take the girl out of the country.
Yeah. So zero hunger, life on land, and responsible consumption. What about you, Marcus?
Well, I think the obvious one for me is probably the health and wellness one, but actually being a beneficiary of a lot of the of education, I think that's something that you know, I'm very passionate about, and certainly, you know, having been involved in innovation, that's certainly something that, you know, those definitely resonate with me. But actually, the one that I'd call out most, given and having looked into it a little bit more, is the gender equality one. So, you know, it's actually quite refreshing being on a panel where I'm actually the only male on the panel, and that's awesome. But I think most people possibly, you know, who aren't aware of it, is that, you know, the gender equality one is actually such a linchpin to so many of the others. So as far as, you know, maternal and child health, and in the health and wellness side of things, education and economic prosperity, there's so much important work that women, who are the center of communities and families, need to be supported to do that, like, you know, without it, you won't actually meet a lot of the sustainable development goals, not necessarily in WA, but, like, you know, because we're obviously very lucky as a, you know, as a state, but certainly in a lot of other parts of the world, I think it's certainly something that, you know, needs to be supported. So I'm really glad to be involved in something like this. So thank you.
Brilliant. I think, you know, it's important to recognize that a lot of women are in the healthcare sector. They're also in the front line during any sort of disaster and any sort of crisis like this. And unfortunately, every time when there is a crisis, and, you know, when it goes back to cutting of jobs, the women, the minorities are always the first to get hit. And you're already starting to see that in the States and in some parts of Europe. So I think it's essential. And thank you so much for recognizing the work that women do. But we're very happy to have you, particularly for a topic of innovation. I'm really glad that we have so many women on this panel. And Cettina, what about you? What's your favorite SDG goal?
Yeah, I struggle with this one because they're so interdependent, but the no poverty one is probably something I'm really passionate about, because I think, you know, it was a problem before, but now it's just going to accelerate as people start to lose their jobs, and especially in developing countries where it's heavily reliant on almost independent traders or micro enterprises and things like that. You know, industries are basically being wiped out in the types of countries. So I think that is going to be one that you know, needs a lot of focus and attention moving forward. Not that the others don't, as you're saying, it's hard to choose.
Yeah.
But the other two, which I spoke to at the beginning, which is what are my passion areas, and that would definitely be health and wellbeing and quality education. And I think for me, those three things are probably where I'd like to spend most of my time.
Brilliant. Lily, before we end, do you have any questions for the panel speakers?
No, I'm just in awe of everyone's responses, in all fairness. A really engaging session. So thank you so much. And thank you, Cettina, Marcus and Elizabeth, for your time, for sharing your experiences and insights with us. We really, really appreciate your participation and support. And of course, thank you to Sandy for moderating the discussion so brilliantly. Our faithful leader. I'm personally more inspired, hopeful and motivated than I was coming into this session. And I'm sure whoever watches this will feel the same. And we face such grave and great challenges. Knowing people like yourselves are part of the solution is comforting. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Lily. And so we'll just end the session here. We thank everyone for your time, and we look forward to continue to keep in touch.